Figure 5.9 Gradebook.java. We're now going to revisit our Gradebook class, and we're going to keep track of some additional information. In particular, we're going to keep track for each numerical grade input of the corresponding letter grade and see how many A grades, B grades, C grades, D grades, and F grades get input. And then we're going to display a summary of all that information when the instructor finishes inputting all of the numerical grades. Now, before looking at the class gradebook in this example, I'd like to actually take a look at the test program and run the program for you as well. So you can see here that we have our gradebook test application, and inside of that application we've got an instance of class gradebook that we've created called my gradebook, and once again we've initialized it with the string CS101 Introduction to Java Programming. Now, our program then has three statements that it executes by invoking methods on our gradebook object. First, we display the welcome message for the gradebook. Then we tell the gradebook object to input the grades from the user, the instructor, and then we tell the gradebook to display the grade report. And again, this is typical of lots of object-oriented programming because of the fact that we're encapsulating inside class gradebook the functionality of inputting the grades and displaying the message and displaying the grade report. We don't see much logic here in the main method. We simply have creation of an object and a bunch of what we might refer to as straight line code where we just execute statement, statement, statement and tell an object what to do for us. So let's go ahead and execute this program at the command prompt. You can see here that we've got the program compiled already. Okay, so it prints out our welcome message initially, and then it prompts us to start entering the integer grades in the range from 0 to 100, and also that we have to type the end of file indicator to terminate our input in this example. So I'm going to start out by typing some grades here. I want to make sure that I cover all my bases in terms of showing you letter grades for all the different values here. And so that should be enough to get us going here. And let me type Control Z and then press Enter, which is how I submit the end of file indicator on a Windows system. You can see up here that we've also talked about how to do it on a Linux, Unix, or Mac OS X system as well. So after we've summarized all those grades, the grade report gets displayed, and it tells me that the total of the 10 grades I entered was 778. So I can see my class average here of 77.80. Apparently I did 10 grades, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different grades. So that did count correctly. And then separately it shows me the number of A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's I received. So there were 4 A's, 1 B, 2 C's, 1 D, and 2 F's in this particular set of input. Right, so now let's go back and see how we were able to input the values and then how we summarized all of that information via the methods of class gradebooks. So remember, the first thing we did was display the message for the welcome message, then we told it to input the grades and then display the grade report. Now, a lot of the class gradebook is still the same as our prior versions, and then we've got some new features here as well. As we did before, we have a private instance variable course name of type string where we store the name of the course. We now have a few new integer instance variables as well. The variable total represents the sum of all the grades that have been input. The variable grade counter keeps track of how many grades have been input. And then the counter variables A count, B count, C count, D count, and F count represent the number of A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's respectively. Now, in our constructor, you can see here that we're only initializing the course name. So all of these other variables of type int are getting their default values, and you may recall that the default value for an integer is the value 0. So our total and grade counter are 0 to start out, and all of our counters for the letter grades are also 0. We've provided set and get methods in this example to set or get the course name respectively. We still have our display message method to display the welcome message, which also consists of the course name. And then we have one of our new methods, the input grades method. Now, to do input from the command line, we're going to use a scanner object once again. And the scanner object is initialized with system.in to indicate that we want to read from the keyboard. We've got a local variable of type int called grade, where we'll store each grade as its input. And we have a big prompt here at lines 50 through 54 that gives the user the instructions telling them what they need to do, which is basically continue to enter numbers from 0 to 100 and then enter the end of file indicator when they're done typing the input. So we've got a new loop here that does something we haven't introduced before with the scanner class. You'll notice that our condition says input.hasNext. This method of the scanner class hasNext returns a Boolean value of true if in fact the stream is still valid for input, and false if the end of file indicator has been encountered. So input.hasNext will return true for us until we type the end of file indicator, and because of that we'll be able to go into the loop at line 59 and read the next integer value and store it in the grade. We'll then use our shorthand notation to add the value of the grade to the value of the total and store the result in the variable total. And then we'll increment our grade counter as well to keep track of how many grades have been input. Before we do our next iteration of the loop, we then invoke another method of our own class, increment letter grade counter, and we give it the grade that was just input, and we're going to use this method to determine what letter grade counter should be incremented. Now, whenever you're looking at a method call inside of your code, if you see a method name that is not qualified with a class name and a dot before it, or an object name and a dot before it, that normally means you're calling one of your own methods. And indeed, we are calling our own method called increment letter grade, which you can see here the definition starts at line 69. So let's jump down and take a look at that method, which introduces the Java switch statement as well. This function receives as its argument the integer grade that we want to test, and we have a switch statement that divides that grade by 10. Now remember, when you have an integer divided by an integer, you get an integer result. So by dividing all of our grades by 10, we're always going to wind up with a number somewhere from 0 to 10, because the grades we're inputting are 0 to 100. So for example, if I divide 77 by 10, the result is 7, and I'm going to increment a counter that has to do with the letter grade C for a 77 grade. So if you take a look, this is our so-called controlling expression. We're going to take the value of that expression and we're going to compare it with the so-called case labels that you see throughout this switch statement. Each case label starts with the keyword case followed by some literal value, in this case the value 9, and a colon, and each individual case represents one value to test for. You cannot specify ranges of values in a switch statement. If you want to do that, you can use a nested if-else statement instead. So if the controlling expression's value is either 9 or 10, then we're going to say that the grade is an A, and we're going to increment the A count variable. The break statement inside of a switch statement says immediately terminate the switch statement and jump to the end so that we can continue with the next statement in sequence. The next thing in sequence is the end of this method, which would cause us to return, in this case, back to the calling method. On the other hand, if the case was not 9 or 10, we would skip the statements at lines 76 and 77 and move down to the next case in our switch statement. And we keep looking for a matching case until we find a match. As soon as we find a match, we would then execute the corresponding statements, which are, in our case, always include a break to jump to the end of the switch. So you can see here for the A grades, if the value of the controlling expression is 9 or 10, we'll execute this chunk of code and increment the A counter. If the letter grade if the numeric grade is a value from 80 to 89, when we divide by 10, case 8 will be the match and we'll increment the B counter. For grades 70 to 79, we'll match this case and we'll increment the C counter. For grades 60 to 69, will match the case 6 and increment the D counter, and for all other values we're going to execute the so-called default case, in which we're going to increment the F count. Now, because the default case is the last case in the switch statement, this break statement is actually optional. We don't really need it because we would simply flow through the end of the switch and continue with the next statement in sequence. But a lot of programmers provide the break statement even in their default case just for symmetry with the other cases. Alright, so that's the Java switch statement. We'll then return back up here to our while loop, and because we're now at the end of the while loop, we'll come around to check and see if there's any more input. If there's more input, we will then read the next grade and add it to the total, etc. Now, once the summarizing of all the letter grades has been done, we saw back in main that we invoked the display grade report method, which first prints out the string grade report preceded by a new line character. We then check to make sure that we have grades that were input. If the grade counter is not equal to 0, that would mean that the user did indeed input some grades. And we saw this expression in an earlier example where we took the integer total and cast it to type double so that we can force it to be a floating point number. And when we have a floating point number divided by an integer, we automatically get a floating point number divided by a float, because Java will promote the other integer value to a double value. So we get our double version of the average. We then print out the number of grades that were entered and what the total of those grades were. We then print out the class average, and notice once again the use of %.2f to format that floating point number with 2 digits to the right of the decimal point. And then we output a whole bunch of values in this last printf statement. Specifically, we are outputting each letter grade and its corresponding count as well to summarize the results. If there were no grades entered, then instead we'll print out no grades were entered and the program will terminate. So again, we've got this enhanced version of the GradeBook class. It's now a little bit more realistic in that it's actually maintaining a lot more state information, things like the number of letter grades that correspond to all the numerical grades that were input, the total of all the grades, how many grades were input, etc. And we've provided a set of functionality for manipulating that data, and then our test program, of course, is exercising that functionality.
Looking to advance your career by acquiring new skills? Tired of expensive off-site training programs? Wish you could learn from the best instructors in the industry? Look no further than live lessons. Self-paced, personal video instruction by the world's leading technology publishers. Each live lesson comes with a DVD featuring 3 to 4 hours of instructor-led classroom training, sample program code that allows you to work along with your personal instructor, and an example-rich study guide. Live lessons allow you to watch the entire course from start to finish, or navigate directly to any of the individual lessons. You'll literally watch over the shoulder of your instructor as he shows you how to build state-of-the-art applications. Live lessons, the power of the world's leading technology experts at your fingertips. To learn more, visit mylivelessons.com today.